"This is rubbish," the executives said, until John Lennon played this chord. 12 seconds. London. A city where dreams are often born, but just as often, brutally crushed. In the hushed, opulent boardrooms of the music industry, where suits held more power than soul, a legend stood at a precipice. John Lennon, the voice of a generation, was about to face the cynical gaze of men who saw only profit until a single, defiant chord cut through the silence. The year is 1971. London, still vibrating with the echoes of the swinging 60s, was now firmly in the grip of a new, more cynical decade. The music industry, once a wild frontier, had become a corporate behemoth, its arteries clogged with profit margins and market trends. Artistic integrity often took a back seat to commercial viability, and the raw and untamed spirit of rock and roll was being meticulously packaged and sold. John Lennon, a man who had redefined music, found himself increasingly at odds with this sterile, calculating world. He had returned to London from his brief, tumultuous American sojourn, carrying the weight of a shattered empire, the Beatles, and the burden of his own relentless search for truth. The city, with its ancient stones and modern anxieties, felt both familiar and profoundly alien. He walked the streets of Mayfair, the bustling thoroughfares of Oxford Street, the quiet corners of St. John's Wood, but the landscape of his mind was far more turbulent. He was in a period of intense creative output, yet also profound personal struggle. His music was becoming rawer, more confessional, stripped bare of the elaborate orchestrations and pop sensibilities of his past. He was seeking an authenticity that resonated with his own internal chaos, a sound that reflected the disillusionment of the times. But this raw truth was often uncomfortable, challenging, and far from the commercially polished product the industry demanded. He had been summoned to a meeting, a sterile gathering in a high-rise office overlooking the grey expanse of the city. A room filled with men in expensive suits, their faces etched with the weariness of endless negotiations and the cold calculation of business. They were the gatekeepers, the arbiters of taste, the ones who decided what the world would hear. And John Lennon, the defiant prophet, was about to present them with something they weren't prepared for, a piece of his soul, distilled into a new composition, a sound that defied categorization, a truth that refused to be commodified. He was about to clash with the very system he had once conquered, armed with nothing but his guitar and an unwavering belief in the power of a single, resonant chord. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John Lennon. The name itself was a declaration, a challenge to the status quo. In 1971 London, he was a man defined by his uncompromising vision, a restless spirit perpetually pushing against boundaries. His environment was a paradox. The opulent comfort of his Tittenhurst Park estate, a sprawling sanctuary outside the city, yet his mind was a battlefield of ideas, anxieties, and a relentless creative drive. He was a man of immense wealth, yet he often felt impoverished in spirit, searching for a deeper truth beyond the superficiality of fame. His days were a mosaic of intense creative bursts and profound introspection. He'd spend hours in his home studio, surrounded by reel-to-reel tapes, mixing boards, and the ghosts of countless songs. The air in these spaces was thick with cigarette smoke, stale coffee, and the potent scent of creation. He was experimenting, stripping away the layers, seeking a raw, unvarnished sound that reflected his own turbulent inner world. His iconic round glasses, once a symbol of intellectual curiosity, now seemed to magnify the world's perceived flaws and his own. He was a creature of habit, yet constantly seeking disruption. He'd drive his Rolls-Royce through the bustling streets of London, a solitary figure behind tinted windows, observing the world that adored and reviled him in equal measure. He was a man of the people, yet increasingly isolated, his circle shrinking, his trust a precious, fragile thing. He had always been a provocateur, a truth-teller, and now, more than ever, he refused to compromise his artistic integrity for commercial gain. His relationship with Yoko, a vortex of creative collaboration and emotional dependency, was his anchor. She was his muse, his mirror, his unwavering support in a world that often misunderstood him. But even her spiritual insights couldn't shield him from the cynical gaze of the music industry. He was an architect of sound, but now he was building something different, something raw and challenging, a sound that defied easy categorization. He was about to present this uncompromising vision to the very people who sought to commodify his soul, armed with nothing but his guitar and an unwavering belief in the power of a single, resonant chord. The meeting was held in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom, high above the bustling streets of central London. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and unspoken expectations. Around a polished mahogany table sat a phalanx of record executives, their faces a mask of corporate indifference. These were the men who held the keys to the kingdom, the arbiters of commercial success, their eyes trained on profit margins rather than artistic merit. John Lennon walked in, a figure of defiant individuality amidst the sea of grey suits. He carried his acoustic guitar, its worn wood a stark contrast to the gleaming chrome and glass of the room. He was there to present his latest work, a collection of songs that were raw, honest, and deeply personal, a stark departure from the polished pop anthems that had made him a global sensation. He began to play, his voice a raw, vulnerable instrument, his fingers coaxing melodies from the guitar. The songs were stripped bare, devoid of the elaborate production that often characterized his previous work. They spoke of pain, of disillusionment, of a yearning for truth in a world steeped in illusion. He poured his soul into each note, each lyric, offering a piece of himself to these corporate gatekeepers. The executives listened, their expressions unreadable. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others exchanged subtle glances, their eyes betraying a growing skepticism. This wasn't the catchy, radio-friendly material they expected from a Beatle. This was too raw, too challenging, too real. When he finished, a heavy silence descended upon the room. It wasn't the silence of awe, but the silence of judgment. Finally, one executive, a man with a perpetually bored expression, cleared his throat. "John," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we appreciate the effort, but frankly, this is rubbish. It's not commercial. It's not what people want to hear from you. Where are the hooks? Where's the market appeal?" Another chimed in, "It's too dark, too self-indulgent. We need something that sells, something that resonates with the masses, not just your personal angst." The words hung in the air, cold and dismissive, a brutal rejection of his raw, uncompromising vision. John Lennon, the man who had once commanded the world's attention, was being told his art was worthless. The words, "This is rubbish," echoed in the sterile boardroom, a brutal dismissal that cut deeper than any critical review. John Lennon, a man who had faced down critics, politicians, and even the Queen, felt the weight of their corporate indifference settle upon him. But it wasn't just a rejection of his music, it was a rejection of his truth, his evolving artistic soul. The executives, their faces impassive, continued to offer their feedback, a litany of commercial demands and creative compromises. "We need something lighter, John," one suggested, gesturing vaguely. "Something with more universal appeal." Another added, "Think about the charts. Think about radio play. This isn't going to get you there." They spoke of algorithms before algorithms existed, of market segments and demographic targets, reducing his art to a mere product to be packaged and sold. John listened, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with a mixture of frustration and defiance. He had always fought against the system, against the commodification of art. But this felt different. This was a direct assault on his integrity, a demand to conform, to dilute his vision for the sake of profit. The very essence of what made him John Lennon was being challenged, dissected, and found wanting by men who understood numbers more than notes. He felt the familiar surge of anger, the urge to lash out, to unleash a torrent of his legendary wit and sarcasm. But something held him back, a deeper conviction, an unwavering belief in the power of his own truth. He knew what he had created was real, that it resonated with a deeper human experience, even if these men couldn't see it. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, thick with the unspoken tension between artistic integrity and commercial greed. The executives, confident in their collective judgment, waited for him to concede, to agree to rework his material, to bend to their will. They saw a fading icon, not a man whose best days were behind him, clinging to an outdated idealism. But John Lennon, though outwardly calm, was a volcano simmering beneath the surface, preparing for an eruption that would shatter their corporate complacency. He was about to show them that some truths, some sounds, could not be dismissed, could not be bought, and could not be silenced. The air in the boardroom was thick with the executives' dismissive pronouncements. Rubbish, uncommercial, self-indulgent. John Lennon, standing before them, felt the full weight of their corporate disdain. He could have walked out. He could have argued, but a different impulse seized him, a quiet, unyielding defiance. He didn't speak, he simply lifted his acoustic guitar. The room, filled with the lingering echoes of their criticism, fell silent, a grudging acknowledgement of his presence. He positioned his fingers on the fretboard, his gaze sweeping across the skeptical faces, a silent challenge in his eyes. Then he struck a chord. It wasn't a complex progression, not a flashy riff. It was a single, resonant, perfectly placed chord, a G major perhaps, or an E minor, but imbued with a power that transcended its simple construction. It hung in the air, vibrating with an almost physical presence, a deep, mournful, yet undeniably beautiful sound. It was raw, pure, and utterly uncompromising. The sound filled the room, cutting through the cynicism, piercing the corporate indifference. It was a chord that spoke of longing, of hope, of the quiet despair of a world in flux. It was a chord that contained the entire emotional landscape of his new music, distilled into a single, a perfect moment. And it lasted for precisely 12 seconds, 12 seconds of pure, unadulterated John Lennon. The executives who had been so quick to dismiss found themselves frozen. Their expressions, once smug and dismissive, slowly shifted. Their eyes widened. Their mouths, previously so quick with criticism, now hung slightly open. The sound, the sheer, undeniable, emotional weight of that single chord had bypassed their commercial filters and struck something deeper, something primal. It wasn't just a chord, it was a statement, a declaration of artistic truth that needed no words, no explanation. It was the sound of a genius refusing to be silenced, refusing to be commodified. When the final resonance faded, leaving an almost painful silence in its wake, the room was transformed. The executives, who had laughed, who had dismissed, and were now utterly speechless. Their faces, once cold and calculating, now held a look of stunned, almost reverent shock. John Lennon had not just played a chord. He had delivered a profound, undeniable truth, and in those 12 seconds, he had shattered their corporate complacency, leaving them to confront the raw, unyielding power of his genius. The silence that followed the 12-second chord was deafening, a profound stillness that spoke volumes. The executives, moments before so dismissive, now sat in stunned silence, their corporate masks shattered. John Lennon, his guitar still in hand, simply looked at them, a quiet triumph in his eyes. He had not needed to argue, to plead, or to compromise. He had simply played his truth, and it had resonated with an undeniable force. The meeting, which had begun with such cynicism, ended abruptly. There were no more dismissals, no more demands for commercial hooks. The executives, visibly shaken, mumbled apologies, vague promises of reconsideration, and hurried exits. They had been confronted with something beyond their spreadsheets and market analyses, the raw, unadulterated power of artistic genius. John left the boardroom, the grey London sky outside now seeming less oppressive. He had faced the system, and in a single, defiant chord, he had won a battle for his artistic soul. The experience, though initially frustrating, had solidified his resolve. It had reinforced his belief that true art, born of honesty and conviction, would always find a way to cut through the noise, to reach the heart, regardless of commercial pressures. He returned to his studio, his creative fire rekindled, his vision clearer than ever. The incident had transformed him, not by changing his direction, but by strengthening his conviction. He understood now, more acutely than ever, the importance of unwavering integrity, of refusing to compromise his truth for the sake of acceptance. The executive's initial dismissal had been a test, and his 12-second response had been his declaration of independence. He was no longer just a musician. He was a defiant artist, a truth-teller, whose voice and whose chords would not be silenced. The unspoken acknowledgement in that boardroom had been a powerful validation, a testament to the enduring power of his singular vision. The album, born from that defiant chord, was eventually released. It was raw, uncompromising, and deeply personal. It challenged audiences, provoked critics, and ultimately solidified John Lennon's legacy as an artist who refused to be confined by expectations. The executives, chastened by their initial misjudgment, found themselves having to market a masterpiece they had almost dismissed as rubbish. The 12-second chord became a whispered legend within the industry, a cautionary tale of underestimating true genius. John continued his work, his music evolving, always pushing boundaries, always seeking truth. The incident in the boardroom had been a pivotal moment, a stark reminder of the constant struggle between artistic integrity and commercialism. He never forgot the cold gaze of those executives, nor the profound silence that followed his single, resonant chord. It served as a constant affirmation of his path, a testament to the power of unwavering conviction. The story leaves us with a haunting question. What if, in the relentless pursuit of profit, we often overlook the profound, the revolutionary, the truly meaningful? What if the greatest truths, the most powerful emotions, can be conveyed in a mere 12 seconds of sound? John Lennon, the man who dared to imagine, also dared to defy, proving that sometimes a single chord can speak louder than 1,000 words, shattering complacency and leaving an indelible mark on the soul. The echo of that chord still resonates, a powerful reminder that true art, born of honesty and conviction, will always find a way to cut through the noise, to reach the heart, and to leave even the most cynical executives in stunned, reflective silence. What if the most profound truths are found not in grand statements, but in a single, perfectly struck chord?